Hey everyone, it's Miss Lee here. So today in this video I'm going to show you how to use watercolor paint. Now I'm going to start from darkest to the lightest. That's the best way of me trying to blend colors seamlessly and to get that really strong bold outcome. So I'm starting with red and I'm just outlining the side of the fruit. And then whilst that red paint is still wet, I pick up some orange and I tapped off any excess water that was still on my paintbrush and just overlap the red area and start blending the two colors together. And here you can start to see the two colors mixing with another and creating from that dark tone to a lighter tone. Now here is on the time lapse, so it might seem I'm painting very quickly, but I'm not. It is very slow and precise kind of manner, so make sure you apply control and accuracy when painting. So as you can see, I picked up some yellow paint. I didn't clean my brush. I went straight onto yellow paint and just continued overlapping the orange area until it becomes lighter and lighter. Sometimes you might need to tap off any excess water off your paintbrush because you don't want to drown your paper with too much water, because that tends to end up ripping your paper. Also, you don't want to brush over the same area too many times, because that will end up bubbling up your paper and ripping that apart. So try to let go when it's time to move on, come back to it later, let it dry, and then fix it up if you have made any mistakes from there. In terms of mistakes, another way of fixing that, you can get a tissue and just dab on top of that area, and that way it will pick up the paint and remove those areas, and then just let it properly dry and then come back to it afterwards to fix that area. As you can see, the way I hold my brush is quite close to the metal area that holds the bristles together. And when I'm painting, I always look at the tip of the brush, because that's the area that's going to touch your artwork first. So that way I can apply more control in the direction of where I want my paint to go. The other thing that I do to maintain control in how I paint is that the way I lean against the surface. So you can see on my wrist and the side of my hand, I lean against on the surface so that I have more control and precision in the direction I want it to go. Sometimes you can just rotate your artwork around so that it's easier for you to paint in a certain direction, so that you're not straining your wrist in any form of way. And another thing is, when you're painting, try to not rush. It's all about being patient, and you want your artwork to look really good as well. So try to be patient when you're doing this, and think of it, you're just doing one section at a time rather than doing the whole painting in one time. And maybe take some short breaks in between if it gets a little bit tiring for you. So just a little note about being patient, and this is a really good skill of way to practice patience. Right, so the next part, I'm adding the green mold. So first thing I would do is clean my brush and squeeze out the excess water where it's quite dry. Then I apply some green paint and just gently dab it down onto my artwork. And in order to create that effect, you need to make sure your bristles are quite separate from one another, so it creates that rough texture. Make sure you leave some blank spaces in between the area that you just dabbed down for the mold, so that way it looks a little bit more realistic. So as you can see, I mixed a tiny bit of yellow to my white paint to create that creamy texture for the highlight area, so areas that's the lightest tone. And with that, the area that I'm painting right now, I'm trying to create like a variegated wash by mixing in and dabbing in a bit of green whilst the paint is still wet, and that allows the watercolor to bleed into one another and creating a rather interesting kind of look. Right, so I'm pretty much done on this piece, this side of the fruit. The next bit I'm going to do is just outline around the fruit with black paint. Now to do that, I want the black paint to be very opaque, so that means more paint and water. And when you're doing this, try not to do it in one stroke of outlining the whole fruit. Do small strokes at a time, and that way you will avoid going inside the shape, and try to avoid going inside a shape by making sure that a line that you draw is going outwards. So as you can see, I only stretch to how much my wrist can go high enough from. So I do it one small line at a time and then join it up as I go along. And that way you will create a really neat outline when using the black paint. You have to be very careful once you start using black paint because it's very hard to remove that mistake. But if you do accidentally make a mistake, don't worry. Just get some tissue paper and just quickly dab it down, and then that will remove the paint off your work. And then let it dry, and you can come back and fix up any edges that's been kind of tampered with the black paint. So as you can see, again, I'm just doing one small stroke at a time. That way I avoid making any mistakes, and I'm being really controlled how I paint this. Okay, so I'm about to start on the other side of the fruit, and it's the same process like how I've done it on the other side. So remember about blending watercolors together. So start from the darkest color, and whilst the paint is still wet, you get the next lightest color and overlap that, and that way you get a really nice seamless blend. Now, if the watercolor paint dries too quickly, just come back to it afterwards and do it again, give it another go in blending. And it will only work if your paint is wet. Try to avoid sections of red and orange. Try your best to blend colors together so that it looks more realistic and it's seamless, and it looks 3D as well. When you're painting, think about the direction of your lines, the marks that you're making. So always keep looking back at the artist's work so that you know which direction it needs to go and so forth. So here you can see I've rotated my artwork around just so it's easier for my wrist to work around the shape that I'm doing. And remember, just do one small mark at a time when you're outlining your work. Again, there's a reason why you're doing this, is so that you avoid painting over your artwork, and it's an obvious outline when you're doing this. So it's a really good safety barrier for when you're about to paint the background black. Right guys, so you can imagine the next part of this is to completely fill the background using black paint. When you're using black paint, try to brush in a similar direction so that your brushwork looks neat. And when you're painting around the edges, just be careful you don't paint over your fruits that you've been working on very hard on. And make sure it's quite opaque, so sometimes you have to let it dry and come back to it to add another layer. And this is the finished result.